Welcome back to the Great Primeval Show. I am the Archminister and I'm joined by Ancient Realms and Hodgepodge. Today we'll be breaking down Episode 2 of Primeval Series 1, also known as Underground Infestation in North America,
Spinnennest
in Germany, and
Au bout du tunnel
in France. Written by Adrian Hodges and directed by Scylla Ware.
Cutter introduces the show with a brief monologue recapping the viewer in case they missed out or forgot what happened.
The anomalies are conclusive proof that the past exists.
This footage of Cutter doesn't actually appear until later in episode 3. They also show the mosasaur from episode 3 as a little teaser to keep people interested in what's to come. Every recap gets longer and longer in each episode as there's more to cover.
I lost her. But now I think she's back from the dead.
Aside from the start of every recap, this is the only time in Series 1 that Cutter directly speaks to the audience. It then cuts to the titles.
We start out on a train in the London Underground that's been delayed, and one of the passengers is getting a bit hot. When she opens a window to get some air, a carboniferous arachnid tickles her, to which she violently rejects its advances by slamming the window on it, severing one of its legs. Typical behaviour in the underground.
You should see the last tube home on a Friday night.
The severed leg is a practical effect. These become less prevalent throughout the show's run. The carboniferous arachnids are arguably the first creature to be made up for the show. This is due to them possibly being based on several different animals. Most likely it is meant to be the same animal as the mesothelae that appeared in the Carboniferous segment in Walking with Monsters, which itself has a confusing history. It was based on Megarachne, an animal initially interpreted as a giant spider, but during production of Walking with Monsters was found to be a eurypterid, aka a sea scorpion that did not actually live in the sea. Stephen's line,
"Technically, these are probably scorpions,"
may be an in-joke referring to this. To somewhat remedy the situation without having to retool the story, they changed the name of the animal to Mesothelae, which is the name of a group of modern spiders. As for the primeval arachnids, despite often being called spiders, their pincer-like mouthparts appear to be more like those of solifuges, also known as camel spiders, a different group of arachnids that are still alive today. If they are indeed meant to be solifuges, it is possible they are Protosolpuga, a type of solifuge from the Carboniferous of Illinois. As Primeval tends to do, they are much larger than the only known specimen of Protosolpuga, and it is unknown whether they were colonial, as modern solifuges are solitary. All of this makes it very difficult to comment on how accurate these creatures are, as I don't really know what exactly they're meant to be.
This clip of the CMU is an unused scene from episode 1, as you can see Cutter and Stephen walking to their office and Connor jumping off the wall to follow them. Connor is already breaking the Official Secrets Act by telling his friends Tom and Duncan about seeing the Gorgonopsid, to which they both don't believe. These two characters are set up for appearing in the following 2 episodes. We get references to numerous pop culture reference here, including Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, and Matrix Revolutions. Cutter and Stephen pore through 10 years of HELEN'S work in his lab, looking for references to the Forest of Dean anomaly. Cutter receives flashbacks from the night he saw Helen, but he denies anything when Stephen questions him. Even though they're close, he's not ready to open up about that yet. Taking place around this point, a possible cut or deleted scene was in the novelization. Following Abby joining the bug house, this scene would have had Abby in the Wellington Zoo elephant enclosure searching for the parasites in their dung after she left the reptile program in the previous episode. Embarrassingly for Abby, Stephen visits her on behalf of Cutter and gave her the Helen Cutter Educational Trust from the Central Metropolitan University so she can continue on with her reptile program and help with the anomaly investigating team.
Connor arrives at Abby's flat, the first time we see this reoccurring location in the show, and also the first of 3 separate flats she uses, depending on the series. Inside you can see various reptile tanks, including an albino python called Chris, a tortoise, what looks to be a tegu lizard, as well as a few others which are unidentified. Suffice to say, all of these animals are kept in enclosures which are way too small for them, which is ironic because Abby has a giant flat to herself. No idea how she affords it. It's unknown how Connor knew where Abby lives. In Series 2 we see him hacking government files to read details about Abby, so it's possible he did that here. Abby also has the thermostat extra hot to acclimatise Rex to the present day.
You never know, we could find a new little playmate for Rex. They could get together and talk about really old times.
Well, we eventually get some playmates, 14 episodes later, with Sid and Nancy.
The arachnid gets its first taste of mammal, as they hadn't evolved in the Carboniferous. The exterior of Arsenal Station was filmed at Arsenal Station? It's said that Captain Ryan and the Special Forces are still clearing the evidence in the Forest of Dean, likely meaning footprints and the body removal of the Gorgonopsid. Ryan was possibly in charge of building a fence around the anomaly site as seen in episode 6, as well as posting a soldier to guard the area. Claudia mentions Ben and his teacher from episode 1.
Pity the monster didn't eat them both. That would have been the neatest solution. Joke.
More of Lester's dry humour. Claudia convinces Lester to keep Cutter, and presumably the rest of the team, on the anomaly operation.
Connor takes Abby to a very dark, cold and miserable looking location with the sounds of strange owl-like calls in the background. Connor also mentions the Gorgonopsid. Cutter is eating an apple here, something his wife also does in episode 6 and later in series 2 episode 6. Claudia visits Cutter and he mentions Helen's wild theories, something which came back into play in series 3. He also alludes that Helen might still be alive, but Claudia misses it, believing she was lost in the Permian.
What makes you so sure she's dead?
She was lost 200 million years away in the past. What else could she be?
Claudia is wrong here, as the Permian period was 299 to 252 million years ago. In actuality, 200 million years ago was the start of the Jurassic period. Abby and Connor's relationship is quite one-sided here, as Abby is only interested in Stephen at this point.
We should huddle together for warmth.
Peak creepy Series 1 Connor here.
Or not.
Claudia and Cutter discuss how the government's plan to make the anomaly operation a cover-up.
It's not a cover-up. Well, okay, it is.
Connor will be thrilled. The fake dinosaur which Tom and Duncan used to prank Connor with was also presumably made by Crawley creatures, which is a bit ironic since they were also tasked with making realistic creatures for Primeval, and previously the Walking With series and Prehistoric Park. The pest controller becomes controlled by a pest. At sunrise, Cutter manages to convince a police officer not to prosecute Connor and Abby for trespassing, somehow, but lets Connor go from the anomaly operation due to breaking the OSA. The New Forest was also filmed in a part of the Black Forest.
Claudia and Cutter investigate unusual occurrences and creature attacks, as at this point they have no way of tracking the anomalies. This could lead to them investigating false alerts, something which occurs in episode 4 of this series. The Doctor explains how the pest controller is dying from quote-unquote poison. This should be referred to as venom, not poison, but she does correct herself. Babbling about monsters is a quote we hear a few times in series 1.
It's a single puncture mark, but it's not a knife and it's not an axe. It's more like a bite.
From what?
Good question.
Now there is some discrepancy here, as we're shown giant arachnids attacking the pest controller, but then here he has a bite from the ARTHROPLEURA. The hospital exterior was filmed at the Royal Free Hospital in London. Back at the Home Office, Lester mentions the mayor. This may be the minister from series 2 onwards, but in the original timeline.
An early version of the Primeval theme from series 2 and the original soundtrack plays here. This outside area was filmed at Boundary Estate in Bethnal Green. In the underground, we don't know what this bunker was used for, but it's likely left over from a world war. Nice. Back on the surface, this bitten soldier appears to be envenomated, so maybe the arachnids are venomous despite having pincers instead of fangs? Captain Ryan's headache is an actual effect from absorbing too much oxygen, known as oxygen toxicity.
Well, it's classic signs of excess oxygen in the atmosphere.
Ah, yes, Stephen is an expert on the effects of gunfire in oxygen-rich air.
But we're not talking about the Permian era any longer. This is much, much earlier.
How much earlier?
Maybe the Carboniferous.
Love how Cutter's hunches are always correct. The high oxygen content of the Carboniferous atmosphere is speculated to be due to the lack of large terrestrial herbivores to feed on the plants, allowing them to grow unchecked. This led to immense forests and swamps that boosted the atmosphere with oxygen. It is actually the fossilized wood of these forests that became the coal humans burn today. This is also thought to be why arthropods at the time could grow so large, as their respiratory system is not as efficient as those of vertebrates and controls their maximum size.
Now, we need torches. The most powerful you can find.
Cutter rejecting Ryan's offer of a gun is the first instance of his Series 1 arc, where he doesn't want to cause any harm to the creatures for fear of disrupting the timeline. More on this later.
What's she doing?
Abby's got more practical experience with animals than the rest of us put together.
I don't care if she's Dr. Dolittle.
For those of you who didn't know, Dr. Dolittle is a character who could talk to animals.
I can help. I've just finished a study in insect behaviour.
As mentioned earlier, this was the dropped plot of Abby working at the bug house at the zoo. Down in the tunnels, interestingly, the arachnids are sensitive to the light. This either suggests they have been down in the tunnels for a period of time, or the Carboniferous is really dark.
Does anyone have a really big slipper?
We get an awesome pan shot of it as Cutter says,
What's happening to us?
This line coupled with the shot again helps convey such mystery and wonder and captivates the viewer. This doesn't last very long as the team is interrupted by another creature.
It's not a spider.
When it comes to the model, this feels like it's an ARTHROPLEURA in name only. It seems to be a giant version of modern Scolopendra centipedes, and as such, the characters often refer to it as a centipede. At the time, arthropleurids were considered a distinct group of extinct myriapods, the group of arthropods including both centipedes and millipedes. More recent studies have found that arthropleurids to actually be true millipedes, making this portrayal even further from Arthropleura than it already was. There were scolopendromorph centipedes that lived in the same time and place as Protosalpuga, such as Matsoscolopendra, but this animal was only about 5 centimeters long, a far cry from the 6-meter giant seen here, which is also twice as long as the longest estimates for Arthropleura. There is also no evidence for Arthropleura being venomous. Arthropleura is now thought to have not lived in the dense swamps, but rather in more open woody habitats. This is also yet another creature that also appeared in Walking with Monsters, as well as Prehistoric Park.
As Cutter is trapped in the service tunnels, it's unclear whether the echoing of his long-lost wife is real or delusional from oxygen toxicity. Helen actually being present in the underground would suggest real, but how she disappears would suggest delusion. Why she continues to elude him is unknown, since she actually wants to speak to him. Perhaps she's more comfortable in her own prehistoric territory, being the Carboniferous, or later the Cretaceous as seen in the next episode.
Hey, did you see what kind of creature it was?
Some kind of centipede.
They're huge!
Strange that Stephen doesn't know about Arthropleura, considering he's a paleo lab tech.
Preferred habitat, behavioural patterns, strengths, weaknesses. We don't know! No one does!
Connor, mate. He's like a walking encyclopedia of this stuff. He probably has giant bug fridge magnets.
Knowing Connor, he probably does. As Claudia calls Connor back into the team, Stephen's close friendship with Cutter is reinforced here, as he refuses to leave his friend trapped, even at the expense of his own safety. As Stephen defends himself with a makeshift flamethrower, the music blaring, you can hear chains rattling, creating a sense of uneasiness. A chain was also one of the weapons Stephen chose not to use. The Anomaly's magnetism suddenly spikes and takes the flamethrower. Wait, hold on. Did this start the Carboniferous forest fire in Walking with Monsters and Prehistoric Park?
This is going to go through the forest at a fair old lick. Hey guys! We got to move out of here!
When Stephen goes into paralytic shock from the Arthropleura venom, he sees Helen in her civilian clothes instead of her usual green jumpsuit. Again, we don't know if this is delusional or real. Now we have to question why Helen doesn't help Stephen here. We know they had a close relationship 8 years ago. She probably presumed that Cutter will get him to safety, but she could have at least helped with the ARTHROPLEURA though.
Helen's alive! She was here. She gave me a message. This message. She's waiting on the other side of the anomaly. She said, if you want to know the truth, you gotta come and find her.
Cutter is pretty level-headed here while helping Stephen until he hears the mention of Helen, and suddenly he's demanding to know the message of Helen waiting on the other side of the anomaly.
Using his database, Connor IDs the centipede as an arthropleurid. Also, his database is only said to include vertebrates. Connor mentions the centipede as...
It's pretty big and scary looking, but it's more or less timid.
This is likely referring to the real animal and differences in the primeval ARTHROPLEURA, which is building to the dropped plotline of Cutter noticing differences in the timeline, since the creatures are different compared to the fossil record.
The spiders are off the hook. It's the centipede that's the killer.
So they're not venomous? If they are, perhaps their venom just isn't as potent as the ARTHROPLEURA's. Claudia catches Stephen asking Cutter to tell the others about seeing Helen, to which she questions him, but he brushes it off as hallucination. He's only just been told himself, so is probably still processing it all before deciding to tell everyone else.
Have dinner with me.
We'll talk about it when you meet her.
Wow. Not only has Stephen had an affair with Helen, now he's asking out another woman, despite currently dating Alison?
There are no obvious treatments. People just don't die of centipede bites.
Well, this isn't strictly true. Death from centipedes, whilst rare, is possible, especially if allergic reactions are involved. Captain Ryan and the soldiers follow Cutter's theory and herd the spiders back through the anomaly using torches.
What are you going to do?
I'm going to invite a very angry centipede to bite me.
Cutter and Connor go back down to the underground for a venom sample. Notice the whole atmosphere in the tunnels has changed now. Things are a lot less frantic and deranged, suggesting the oxygen-rich air is cleared, allowing rational thought. Upon remembering that ARTHROPLEURAs could burrow and finding said burrow, Connor is finally proving himself useful on the team.
Here, put this in your clothes. It's turpentine. Bugs hate it.
Yes, turpentine actually does repel insects. Another pop culture reference here where Connor mentions Star Trek The Next Generation.
I won't have a panic attack. I will not have a panic attack.
In the novelisation, the power substation is confirmed to power the London Underground. Upon retrieving the venom sample from the ARTHROPLEURA, it gets its mandibles caught up in a metal stool and electrocutes itself in a pretty graphic way. So many creatures in the show end up dying gruesomely like this. Fun fact, whilst filming this scene, the ARTHROPLEURA's stand-in was just a paper face on a stick.
So, tell me about Helen.
What about Helen?
You saw her.
I saw her.
Stephen is cured using the anti-venom, but has temporary amnesia and doesn't remember about Helen's visitation when questioned by Claudia. Connor mentions Buffy the Vampire Slayer here as well. Cutter is left to ponder the anomaly as he sits in front of it. Staring into its beauty, Connor is allowed back on the team, and he and Cutter properly start their student-mentor relationship.
I don't suppose you'd consider giving me a cool nickname, would you?
No.
No.
Cutter then extends his arm out to the anomaly and asks,
Where are you, Helen? What do you want?
his hand being so close and yet so far as he reaches for the past, but decides against finding Helen and stays in the present.
In closing, episode 2 takes place over 2 full days, and again it's approximately a day to a week between this and the next episode. Join us next time for the breakdown of episode 3 of Primeval Series 1.